up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another episode of the BnG podcast, episode 115. And before we get too deep into this video, guys, if you're checking us out on YouTube, be sure to comment, be sure to like, and be sure to subscribe. Most importantly, be sure to subscribe. On the road to 2K followers. I'm trying to get there before the draft, but I cannot do it without you guys. And most importantly, not only sub, but flood those comments, because I love interacting with my fans in the Washington Commanders community. And not only Washington Commander fans, but I love chopping it up with all kinds of NFL fans. I know all you guys check out my videos, and I really appreciate it. So go ahead and hit those comments up so we can get the chatting back and forth. But most importantly, hit that sub button. But to give you a timestamp, as I do for all of my episodes, today is Monday, March 11th, 2024, and today is what is presumed to be day one of the NFL free agency period. And why I say presumed to be is because this is actually the beginning of the legal tampering period. If you guys haven't checked out my free agency preview episode that I dropped earlier today, go ahead and check that out, where I explain everything behind the legal tampering period. But essentially, today and tomorrow, Monday and Tuesday, are where guys can start to agree to terms on a contract, but they can't officially sign these deals until Wednesday, when is the official start of the new league year. But, you know, the NFL has been getting its NBA on with Midnight Madness and Free Agency Frenzy. We should call it Noon Madness, because the legal tampering period did start at noon. And the Washington Commanders got the ball rolling. And they didn't fall short of making many major moves today. They made 4 signings today outside of their first free agent signing, which was Zach Ertz, who was able to sign before the free agency period, the legal tampering period, because he wasn't on an official roster at any point last year. That's why he was able to sign last week. So he was technically our first official free agent, and then we got to sign 4 more guys today. So our first signing came in at about 1 p.m. It was about an hour after the legal tampering period started, and this is a guy that we hit the ball out the park on this one. We hit the nail on the head with this one, whatever analogy that you want to call it. And this is a guy that I mentioned that I think that we were going to be in on with my potential signings in my free agency preview episode, and that's defensive end Dorance Armstrong, previously of the Dallas Cowboys. You are now a Washington Commander. So congrats and welcome to the squad, Dorance Armstrong. This is a guy that will be going into his age 27 season, and this is a guy that we signed to a 3-year, $33 million deal with a max value at $45 million in the total contract. And guys, in my terms yesterday, if you checked out that free agency preview episode, I'm pretty good at this. But Dorance Armstrong got a bigger bag than I even presumed. I had the deal or the terms agreeing that we would be giving him at 3 years, $27 million, essentially a $9 million per year contract. But his base value gets him to $11 million per year, with a $22 million guarantee and I believe a $13 million signing bonus. And I know a lot of people started to freak out once the contract details came out, and they said that he had a max value of $45 million total on his contract. But guys, we got to understand what they mean by max value. This is a contract that is backloaded and it's incentive-laden on the back end towards the end of the contract. And the incentives are actually go in year by year. So in order for Dorance Armstrong to ever hit that $45 million max value, he's going to have to ball out. That's what the terms of this contract says. So if we want to freak out about him potentially ever hitting that $45 million, just know that if he hits that $45 million max contract number, he was a productive player for the duration of his contract. Because that's the only way that he would get to this max value, is by hitting those incentives, by staying on the roster long enough to get to those latter years where the contract is somewhat backloaded in years 3 and 4. But as I mentioned in my episode yesterday, I love this signing. This is somebody that played under Dorance Armstrong, and this is somebody that you can put a direct correlation to a tick in his production to the implementation of Dan Quinn being inserted to the Dallas Cowboys coaching staff. Dan Quinn was able to unlock some talent in Dorance Armstrong. This is a guy that's had 13 and a half. This is a guy, that has had 13 and a half sacks over the last 2 years and has become improving run defender year after year after year. And this is somebody who's had, I believe that his best football can potentially be ahead of him. Age 27 season. And one thing that I loved about Dorance Armstrong, and we mentioned it in our episode, because you come to BnG for the most raw, uncut, and unfiltered analysis. And we gave it to you yesterday when we mentioned how much juice that Dorance Armstrong provides as an interior pass rusher on passing downs and things of that nature. And that's something that I've seen the national media talk about after this signing. Well, guess what? We were first on it at BnG, like always. But, I mean, it's true, though. Dorance Armstrong provides a lot of juice. Not only as a perimeter pass rusher on the edge, he's automatically our best edge defender. He'll be our edge one on our depth chart. So we know that he's being brought in to be a starter on this Dan Quinn defense. And he's able, as I mentioned before, when you bring in guys that's familiar with your coaching staff and their scheme, he's able to translate the scheme and the playbook easier than anybody else, because this is something that he's been running for the last 3 years. So he's able to accelerate your rebuild, accelerate your production. And all in all, I think this was a great signing. This is a signing that we predicted. So, we don't like to do our horns over here at BnG. It's like, nah, JK, yes, we do. But we were on it, and a lot of Washington Commander fans were on it as well. This was a signing that was on the rumor mill that actually became true and, turned into fruition. And it was a beautiful signing. So that's how we started off free agency day one with the signing of Dorance Armstrong. So with our second signing, we came in. We turned into the Washington Cowboys today. Now, I don't know how I feel about that. Matter of fact, yes, I do. Because anytime that you get to strengthen your roster while weakening a divisional opponent, anytime that you do that, that's a successful day. Well, guess what? We double dipped and we doubled down on that today, signing the center, Tyler Biadasz, who's going into his age 26 season. He was drafted in 2020 out of the University of Wisconsin. And y'all know, I've been saying this for 3 years, for my 3 years running this podcast, and we haven't selected one yet. I love me a corn-fed Wisconsin lineman. Well, guess what? We finally got one. Look amongst many successful offensive lines in the 2000s and the 2010s and the 2020 shit for the last 2 decades. I'll tell you one thing a lot of those guys have in common. Is an offensive lineman from the University of Wisconsin. That's offensive line U. Jerry Jones knows it. He done dabbled into a couple of Wisconsin's, linemen throughout the years. And that's why, the Dallas Cowboys has had some of the better offensive lines in the last decade and things of that nature. Well, Tyler Biadasz is another guy. And I don't want to oversell it like he's a tremendous player, but I'm actually going to get into his positional breakdown. But let's go through these contract numbers and his player breakdown, but let's go through these contract numbers first. He signed with a 3-year, $30 million deal. I didn't see any extra, contract details in Tyler Biadasz's deal. So as of right now, to the surface level, this is a 3-year, $30 million year, $30 million deal with an annual average value of $10 million per year, which you guys might see and say, whoa, that's high for a center. But if you guys see some of the money that these interior linemen are making today, the NFL has let you guys know that stopping the interior pass rushes was priority going into the 2024 season. When you see Jonah Jackson get the deal that he did with the signing with the Los Angeles Rams, that was a guy I know. I wanted to bring him in the Washington Commanders. I wanted him to bring him to the Washington Commanders, and I mentioned him in our free agency preview episode yesterday. But the Los Angeles Rams are essentially spending, $34 million annual average value on their guard. So that tells you how we're prioritizing the interior offensive line in the NFL today. A guy like Robert Hunt from the Miami Dolphins, I forgot who he signed with, but he signed a 5-year, $100 million deal. This is a guy that, as an offensive guard, is getting $20 million a year. So when you look at the trend of that in the NFL in this free agency period, $10 million annual average value doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot, especially for a guy that you're automatically going to be beefing up the interior with. He's better than Tyler Larson and Nick Gates combined. Now, this does tell you what this regime thinks about Ricky Stromberg. They think that he's not the center of the future. I'm not saying that he doesn't have a spot on this roster, but one thing that this signing tells you is that they think that Ricky Stromberg, at the very least, isn't the center of the future. But going to Tyler Biadasz, this is a guy that's been a 3-year starter. This is a guy that actually, I'm not going to say that, essentially he did beat out Carter Williams, who was a guy that is a stud of a center that a lot of the Washington Commander fans actually wanted to bring into Washington from Miami coming off of a torn ACL. Well, guess what? Tyler Biadasz was the guy that got Connor Williams out of Dallas because of his capability of playing center on a rookie deal and things of that nature. So he's able to supersede and take spots from talented players and things of that nature. He's a 2022 Pro Bowler, and probably my favorite stat that I looked through after we signed Tyler Biadasz is that he's missed 3 games in the last 3 years, and one of those was against the Commanders last year, where the Dallas Cowboys were essentially not resting their starters, but they didn't play everybody. They weren't at full strength. And I think that Tyler Biadasz was simply a maintenance injury. So essentially missing 2 games in the last 3 years. He's solid. He's super solid. Just like all these corn-fed Wisconsin linemen. This is the guy that had the 4th best pass block rate of any center last year. So he's elite in pass block, in pass protection and things of that nature. And this is a guy whose technique is ultimately going to get him over the top. He's not a superior athlete by any means, but he's perfectly fits the build of a Wisconsin lineman. And for offensive line, technique reigns supreme anyways. And I don't need you to be a super athlete in the middle of my interior offensive line anyway when you're in the middle of a phone book. Having ballerina feet is nice, but I like them big uglies that's going to get down into the nitty-gritty. You know, one of my favorite sayings, and that's something that Tyler Biadasz is going to do. Going into his age 26 season. So this is a trend that we've seen for the first 2 signings with, 3-year deals, but these are guys that are, in the prime of their career. These are guys that have already produced but are in their prime of their career, where you can argue that their best ball is ahead of them. They're entering the prime of their athletic career, where they're able to give Washington their best years. And one of my favorite things, before I move on to my third signing, or the third signing of the day, one of my favorite things about the Tyler Biadasz signing is that, Adam Peters decided to pair a veteran center with what is presumed to be a rookie quarterback. Whoever we selected to will be a rookie quarterback at the helm, but you're pairing him with a 3-year starter going into his 4th year, a guy that is familiar with, the culture that Dan Quinn wants to instill, with the culture that Joe Witt wants to instill. And this is something that Cliff Kingsbury did when they drafted Kyler with the first pick in 2019. They brought a veteran center in Rodney Hudson over, who was able to, be his eyes and ears, make the checks on the offensive line and things of that nature. And I think that's what they had in mind when they brought in Tyler Biadasz. So that's a solid signing as well. Going to our third signing, and this is who I ultimately think might be the best player that we signed today. I was giddy when I saw that we signed him. I was a couple minutes late because I was sitting in traffic going to the notifications of the breaking news of us signing him. But that's linebacker Frankie Luvu, who is going into his age 28 season, but he's already going into his 7th season in the NFL. So he's a seasoned vet that is essentially still in the prime of his career. And we signed him to a 3-year deal as well, I believe, where I don't necessarily have the numbers. I didn't see those numbers. I apologize, guys. But I was just so excited when we were bringing in a player of Frankie Luvu's caliber that the numbers didn't matter to me, because we have yearned for great linebacker play since the years of London Fletcher. And London Fletcher he did retire 10 years ago. So we haven't had exceptional linebacker play in the last decade, and I think that Frankie Luvu is the guy that can bring that. This is a guy that was a rotational player in his time with the New York Jets after being drafted in 2000. Oh, no, he was undrafted in 2018, but then he blossomed into a Pro Bowl caliber player with the Carolina Panthers. And as I mentioned, I said that he's the best player that we signed today, and you can make a case that he was the best linebacker on the market. If you guys checked out my free agency preview episode, I mentioned 2 linebackers that I would love to sign in Azeez Al-Shaair and Bobby Wagner. Well, guess what? The reason that I didn't mention Frankie Luvu, because I thought that he was going to have suitors where those suitors are, more talented in Washington and gives him a better potential chance to win the championship, because he's that good of a player. But to see that he's willing to sign with my little old Washington Commanders, that shows you that it's a new day in Washington. As I told you, this is a guy that has 12.5 sacks in the last 2 years. So this is a guy who is an off-ball linebacker, but he exemplifies that positionless type style that Dan Quinn told you he wants to play. Think about, he's not Micah Parsons, but think about a less twitched up Micah Parsons. But guess what? Micah Parsons didn't even have the pass rush grade, PFF pass rush grade as an off-ball linebacker that Frankie Luvu did. Because guess what? He was ranked number 1 with a 90.1 pass rush grade as an off-ball linebacker. With an 80 overall PFF overall grade. This was a guy that was the best player, and I don't think it's far-fetched or hyperbole to say this. This is a guy that was the best player on the Carolina Panthers last year. Brian Burns included. And I know they won, 2 games? So saying that, 3 games, saying that, you were the best player on a 3-win team is like saying that you were the tallest midget. Well, guess what? Not in Frankie Luvu's case. This is a guy that balled out. He had 125 tackles last year to go along with those 12.5 sacks that he had in the last 2 years. So this is a guy that was just waiting for his opportunity coming up from the New York Jets. And he took advantage of it. One thing that I loved about, Frankie Luvu is I mentioned his PFF numbers, his pass rush numbers, his PFF grade. This is a guy that's an analytical darling. And when we're beefing up that analytical department like Josh Harris told us he was going to do with a guy like Eugene Shin, this Frankie Luvu signing screams Eugene Shin advocate of it. It screams that Eugene Shin was a huge advocate from it, a guy that loves the numbers, because guess what? As I mentioned, Frankie Luvu is a statistical darling. He's a statistical darling, and it translates to the field where he produces. This is a guy that jumps out on the film whenever you watch the Carolina Panthers. And this is a guy that exudes and exemplifies everything that Joe Whitt told you he wanted in his defense in his introductory press conference. He told you he wanted guys that come straight downhill, that run fast, see ball, hit ball, get ball, and come smack you in the mouth. Go watch a Frankie Luvu highlight tape and let me know, does he not perfectly exemplify everything that Joe Whitt is looking for? And one of my favorite things is this is a smart football player. This is a guy that was playing the strong side linebacker position before Strack Thompson went out. But then he essentially moved to the middle linebacker position and wore the green dot and was calling plays for the Carolina Panthers last year. So now we know that we have a guy that is capable of calling plays, so we don't need to rely on Jamin Davis to do it. Thank God. We don't need to rely on Cam Curl to do it because it looks like he might not be potentially coming back. But we have a guy that we know can do it, that can take on that task and still produce on the field. So Frankie Luvu is probably my favorite signing of the day. So when I mentioned Frankie Luvu, that was our 3rd signing, and as I mentioned, I think that he's our best player that we signed today. This next signing is undisputedly the biggest name that we signed today. And that's running back Austin Ekeler, who's formerly of the Los Angeles Chargers. And if you guys play fantasy football, which I know many of you guys do, you guys know exactly who Austin Ekeler is. He's likely been a guy that won you your fantasy football championship in years prior. And yeah, if you would have told me that we brought in Austin Ekeler in 2022 and 2021, I would have did a backflip off my balcony. But the sad reality is that it is the 2024 season. Austin Ekeler is going into his age 29 season, and he is coming off arguably the worst season of his career, where he barely edged over 1,000 yards. But listen to what I said there. He barely got over 1,000 yards, but he still outproduced any running back on the Washington Commanders roster. And that's including B-Rob, who we thought had a pretty good year. Now, I don't think that Austin Ekeler is being brought in to be our workhorse back. I think that he's potentially being brought in primarily in a pass-catching role, but this is a guy that, can run the ball if need be. If Brian Robinson goes down, that he can handle the lion's share of the carries. I'm not going to say that he's a workhorse by any means. He's a guy that you want to give 40 carries to. He is not that guy. But on a 2-year, $11.5 million deal where he's only making $4.2 million in the first year, you can't complain about that contract with a guy that has 8,000 career all-purpose yards, 69 touchdowns, and is one of the most efficient pass-catching backs in the NFL's history. And that's not hyperbole saying this. This is a guy that before last season, he was coming off consecutive 100-yard reception seasons. And it wasn't like they were all check down Charlies either. This is a guy that is a playmaker, and he's dynamic with the ball in his hands when healthy. Now, the problem is last year, he never got healthy. He had an ankle injury in week 1, and he never really regained form. I know it was a video clip coming out when we signed him of him chugging along the sideline, where he looked just as slow as just as slow as Darrell Young running down the sidelines and things of that nature. And it didn't look like the Austin Ekeler that we've known to come for years past and things of that nature. But I think that he never really recovered from a high ankle sprain. High ankle sprains for running backs, those are killer. And it's almost like having a turf toe where those linger throughout the year and you're never really 100%. And even though you're capable of playing, you're never going to be producing like the guy that you were when you weren't 100%. But 8K all-purpose yards before the age 29 season coming from a undrafted back. And I think that this, as I mentioned, I think that Eugene Shen was an advocate for the Frankie Luvu signing. I think that this screams Anthony Lynn. This screams Anthony Lynn was an advocate for this Austin Ekeler signing and the reason that Austin Ekeler is a Washington Commander today. And I'm saying that because Austin Ekeler was a guy that made the roster as an undrafted free agent for the Chargers in Anthony Lynn's first year as a head coach. So you know they have an amazing relationship. This is a guy that essentially gave him his chance in the NFL. So yeah, I mean, you tie that with a productive player. You sign him to a low-risk, high-reward contract that you can cut ties with after the first year. This is a tremendous signing with tremendous upside and very little downside. And I love the move because if you pair him with a guy like Brian Robinson, you allow both of those guys to have fresh legs. And he's more productive than a guy like Antonio Gibson, who we know isn't going to be here anymore because he signed a 3-year deal with the New England Patriots, So, like, if you told me that I would be swapping out Austin Ekeler for Antonio Gibson, give me that shit. Inject that shit in my veins every day of the week. Every day of the week. If you would have told me that before today, so I can't scoff at the move. I know some people, the less informed, the more casual fans are like, oh, same old Washington, signing guys while they're over the hill and they're past their prime. I don't necessarily think this is the case with Austin Ekeler. While he might not hit the heights that we saw him hit before when he was winning you your fantasy football league and things of that nature, this is a guy that still hit almost 20 miles per hour in week 1 against the Miami Dolphins last year before that ankle injury. So if he can regain his form, this is a guy that has unlimited juice, and you're giving it to him in a rotational role. And this is a guy that finds the end zone. As I mentioned, he has almost 70 career touchdowns. So you better bring in a guy like that when you're the Washington Commanders and it seems like you've been inept and allergic to the end zone for the last 35 years. I think that's a logical sign, and that gives bringing a guy that has a nose for an end zone into an organization that is allergic and inept to getting into the end zone. So you'll be foolish to scoff at that signing. But that'll do it, man. Let me know what you think about today. The Commanders did it. They really got to it. They really got the ball rolling on the new era in Washington, D.C. And these were Adam Peters' first 5 signings, including Zach Ertz as a GM of an NFL franchise and his beginning, implements of his fingerprints on what he is wanting to potentially be a potential Super Bowl contending roster in the years to come. So let me know how you feel about how is he going about that? Is he on the right track? Let me know if you don't like these signings. Let me know how you feel about these signings. Always chop it up, flood those comments. If you're not checking us out on social media, go ahead and hit us up over there. We ran our victory lap for predicting the Dorance Armstrong signing. So our Twitter is @BleedingBnG, BLEEDIN BNG. Our Instagram is @BleedingBnG, BLEEDING BNG. If you're checking us out on audio-only platforms such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please sure to leave a rating. Please sure to leave a review, preferably 5 stars. That's how we finesse these algorithms so that when you're searching anything Washington Commanders, Bleeding BnG is that #1 content hub that comes up on your search bar. I'm going to be dropping episodes, man. We got the best thing about free agency is that now that day 1 is over, you can look forward to day 2. And if the Washington Commanders keep making solid, productive signings like that, we're going to give you analysis and we're going to give you some content on the video. So be sure to tap into the channel and I'll check in on you guys later.